this was kind of the bit I was wondering about, because there are sort of neural network and other types of programs that are now doing art and music and Suze, what was the one about the scientist, the inference program?
Oh, I've heard, yeah.
Mathematician and scientist, basically.
Question at the back.
A lot of the discussion about simulation seems to have been about the level of abstraction, where we're talking about high-level functional modelling, or groups of neurons or neuronal atoms. I'm assuming that's all running on a machinery that is traditionally, in a classical way, computational. I'm wondering if you, or anyone else, have any thoughts on the importance of the underlying substrate or machinery, or whether there's a limitation of a conventionally computational or algorithmic sort of Turing machine type computer, and whether that's inherently limited in terms of trying to model consciousness.
Are we talking about Gödel theorem type stuff, or yeah? My opinion, and this was not central to anything I was trying to put across, because I mean I hope it was obvious I wasn't trying to say any of these technologies would or wouldn't work, but is what you should be thinking about when you assess that. But in my opinion, your brain does it. Your brain is a physical machine. Therefore, your brain has somehow gotten around Gödel's theorem, and I think there is no reason to believe that we couldn't create something that also did. But then you did use the phrase classically computational, so the argument would be, well, then your brain is not a classical computer. I basically don't think it's a problem fundamentally, but there might have to be some sort of engineering, certain preconceptions might have to be abandoned along the way. It might take a computer that does things, I think Turing was right, and that Gödel's point is overstated quite heavily, and that an idealized serial computer could do anything that a human brain could do.
I mean, that's what Turing proved. He didn't just state it.
Yeah, no, but Gödel's point that there'll always be one axiom within any given system that the system itself can't prove has been generalized by a lot of people to imply.
Yeah, they've gone beyond what Gödel.
I agree. I agree, and I already was a little brusque with someone down the pub over exactly this. I think the Gödel thing is overstated heavily. I've got quite an extreme position in the sense that I didn't refer to the machinery or what's doing the simulating for the simple reason that I don't think, if it has any bearing, I think it will be a specific engineering question. It won't be a game stopper. But that said, that's a big old conversation. I'm not going to hoist a flag and say that's the way things are. It's just my gut feeling, which is exactly what I shouldn't be saying after all of this. I shouldn't just be saying that's my gut feeling.
Darren?
But doesn't the machinery that's used, isn't it potentially very important? Because we don't know the first thing really about what consciousness is, how it is that each of us can have a subjective experience of reality and apparently have free will. And if those properties emerge out of some aspect of the configuration of our brains, something in the way that it's put together, that is missing from whatever simulation you create, then those aspects are going to be...
Well, yeah, I mean, that's... but that sort of becomes... That's true. Absolutely.
It may be. I mean, the stuff I was talking about earlier with quantum consciousness, the collapse of superpositions of quantum states, quantum networks being somehow related to moments of consciousness, that Penrose and Hameroff stuff. If that turns out to be right, and you build a computer that doesn't have any of that, then you're never going to get consciousness.
Well, I absolutely agree. I'll answer this, and then I think, this is a good solid one too, and then maybe take it down the pub. That's true, but I think it's a sub-question. It's almost like a technical issue within the wider question of sort of a dual question of, is reproducing the pattern, the information, enough to reproduce sentience, and what information needs to be reproduced? Now, the way I've approached that in here, so I wasn't referring to the machinery, but I was referring to that question, was to say two things. One, that I think a functionalist interpretation of what consciousness is would have to be true, and that is another big conversation, but that's a position I'm quite firm on, because I would not agree with any argument that, but at the same time, as I've said, I'm extremely conservative about what information have to be included. And I've left open the possibility of Bob scenarios or just epic failures of your simulation if you miss something vital out. So I would say that, okay, assuming my philosophical position is right, assuming that by being conservative I've managed to include all the relevant information, and assuming that we've picked machinery that can actually do those things, I think this is feasible on a technical level. But that's just my point of view.
To follow up on this point, Amon, Darren is saying that the ability to have free will is so critical, and isn't a psychological experiment which shows that often when people think they're making a decision consciously, the roots of the decision have already been taken several milliseconds earlier.
There are, but I also think I think that's sort of a poor man's defence if that's the claim you're making, that there's free will as the mysterious pixie dust in the system or something. Sure, that's true. But the more important point I would say is that when people are talking about things like that, it's normally that they think that they're modelling an algorithmic machine with an algorithmic machine. And at the level of pure machinery, that's right. You're trying to replicate the physical processes that are going on in the central nervous system. But when people are talking about free will and the decisions humans make, that's not an algorithmic machine, that's heuristics. These are the behaviours, the heuristic behaviours, that are not ambiguity-free, that this algorithmic machine, your brain, is creating. You know, these thoughts and behaviours, they're not a finite physical process that has no ambiguity whatsoever. And so what we're doing is, so people make the mistake of thinking that we're using this algorithmic machine to model a heuristic machine. And so therefore, like Roger Penrose would say, the brain can do magical intuitive leaps, which no amount of algorithmic processing can do. No, we're using an algorithmic machine to model the brain's wetware, that hopefully, like a real human brain, would come out with this emergent stuff like apparent free will and logical leaps and intuition and all that neat pixie dust stuff that we do.
Is there anybody who hasn't spoken yet? Is there anybody you want to chime into the discussion?
Yeah.
I just realised the...
I thought that when you brought up Occam's razor to dismiss the simulation argument, it seemed a little bit hand-wavy, and I would...
I see. Well, that was mainly because I just didn't want to go there.
Right, okay. Okay,
I wasn't trying to shoot it down, I was just saying that is beyond the remit of today. No, that's another... I mean, this is one of these talks that very broad, but cans of worms everywhere.
Yeah, okay.
Can I just make 2 points? The first being a bit of like shameless self-promotion. I will actually be discussing a bit about the quantum consciousness. I just want to talk about quantum.
So this is in your talk so,
I mean, if you want to discuss that further, it might.
Yeah? I suspect we'll keep on discussing that for about 5 years to come or so at least. We're not going to nail it in any talk anytime soon, but anyway, I'm sure you'll bring it forward, yeah?
Yeah. The other one is, after all the Penrose bashing, I will just say something good about one of his books. Is he actually states quite nicely this sort of hierarchy of views that you mentioned about the metaphysical and then the actual, going from the strong AI right down to the mysticism point of view. He actually puts that quite nicely in a flip way. So if anyone wants to read that, I think it's in Shadows of the Mind, but it's explained.
Thanks for that.
So.
Right. So maybe we'll break up now. I'm sure there's more to discuss. I think the virtual fog, not virtual fog, the autonomous
utility fog.
Utility fog. We'll get there now. That got short shift. You know, we could certainly dig into that a bit more. But let's again thank Amon for preparing this and.